Shalom to all! Today's office is Nedarim Daf Samach Aleph. We are starting the fifth line with the words Yibaylahu. And today's office sponsor Lilu Nishmas, Mars Miriam Sarah Basab Yaakov Maisha, her Neshama should have an Aliyah, and Lilu Nishmas, Rabbi Yechmiel Mordechai, Ben Reb Chaim, his Neshama should have an Aliyah. And the Gemara says Yibaylahu, they asked the following question. Amar, let's say a fellow said, Yain Shani Tayim Yovel. I'm not going to have wine for a Yovel. Now we know that Yovel is a 50-year cycle. It's 7 Shemitah cycles, which is 7 times 7, that's 49. And Yovel is the 50th year. So he says, I'm not going to have wine for Yovel. Now, Ma'ishnas Chamishim, what about the 50th year itself? Kilifnei Chamishim or Kil Acher Chamishim? Is it considered like everything before the 50, meaning it's included in his neder, or it's like after the 50, it's not included in his neder? So Tashma, the Tanya, we have a brayso, plucked Rabbi Yehuda Rabbanon. It's machlekes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanon. The pasuk tells us about Yovel v'kidashtem es shnas hachamishim shana, and you shall sanctify the 50th year. What do we learn from here? Shnas hachamishim atam mayne, you are to count the 50th year. V'atam mayne shnas chamishim achas, you are not to count the 51st year. Mikanamu, from here they said Yovel eina oil leminyan shavua, that the Yovel year does not count as part of the 7-year cycle. In other words, you count the 50th year on its own, and only once that 50th year is over does a new count for a 7-year Shemitah cycle begin. So it seems to be that according to Rabbanon, the Yovel year is part of his neder. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says Yovel oil leminyan shavua, that the Yovel year is counted as part of the 7 years, and that means that when we start a brand new Yovel cycle, which begins with a 7-year Shemitah cycle, so the first year of that 7-year Shemitah cycle is also the Yovel year. So it seems to be that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the Yovel year is not part of the neder. And I just continue with this brayso. Amr lo Rabbi Yehuda. They asked Rabbi Yehuda, Hareyu Omer, but it says in the pasuk, Sheish shanim tizras odecha. 6 years you shall plant your field. Vein kanel chamesh. And according to you, there's only 5, because we know that Yovel is treated like a Shemitah year, and that means that according to you, Rabbi Yehuda, the first year of the new Shemitah cycle is Shemitah, and the 7th year is Shemitah, leaving only 5 years for planting. And the pasuk says you have to have 6 years for planting. But now Amr lahem, Rabbi Yehuda responded to him, Ledivrechem, according to you, Hareyu Omer, it says in the pasuk, V'asas es hatvu l'shleish hashanim, and it will produce grain for the 3 years. The pasuk is telling Am Yisrael, you don't have to be afraid to keep Shemitah and not plant your crops then, because the 6th year crop is going to last for 3 years, the 6th, the 7th, and the 8th, until the crop of the 8th year grows. Well, the Yovel year messes that up, because Harekan Arba, when we have the Yovel year, everyone agrees that the Yovel year, again, which is treated like a Shemitah year, comes after that last Shemitah, so that means that there's 2 Shemitah years in a row, and that means that we're going to have grain for 4 years, not for 3 years. So how do we answer for this pasuk? Ella ikol okma b'shar shnei shavua. We can understand this pasuk is referring to the other Shemitah cycles, the first 6 of the Shemitah cycles in an entire Yovel cycle. That's when we apply this pasuk, and the pasuk is not referring to the last Shemitah cycle when we're going to have 4 years of grain being produced in the 6th year. So the linami, my shita also says Rabbi Yehuda, ikol okma b'shar shnei shavua. I could explain it as referring to the rest of the Shemitah cycles. That means all of the Shemitah cycles we're going to have 6 years to plant, but the Shemitah cycle that immediately follows the Yovel year will only have 5 years to plant. And continue to explain the Mishnah, we said Ada Pesach Aser V'chulu. So the Mishnah brought a machlekes between Rabbi and Rabbi Yossi regarding when a fellow said he's not going to taste wine until before Pesach. Now Rabbi Meir holds he's only Aser until Pesach. Rabbi Yossi holds he's Aser until after Pesach. Now this wording, until before Pesach, is unclear. It could mean until the moment before Pesach begins, but it also can mean any moment during Pesach which comes before another moment in Pesach. In other words, all of Pesach would be Aser, because even the second to last moment of Pesach comes before the last moment of Pesach, and therefore his neder would be chal until the last moment of Pesach. So the Gemara says, "Remember, Rav Meir savar loy ma'ayil inish nafshei samach alfon bezan tapos feka." It seems to be that Rav Meir holds that a person is not going to get himself into a suffix. He's not going to say something which is ambiguous and unclear, and therefore when this fellow said alufnei Pesach, he wasn't being ambiguous. He was being very clear. It's up until the first moment of Pesach. Whereas Rabbi Yossi holds ma'ayil inish nafshei l'sfeka, that a person will put himself into a matzav of suffix, and therefore when this fellow says alufnei Pesach, since that can be understood in an ambiguous way, and it could be understood that he's asking himself till the end of Pesach, so Rabbi Yossi says that's when he's asher until. But now the Gemara says that's a problem. For a mini last, we see from a Mishnah. The Mishnah tells us a person has 2 sets of daughters from 2 wives. So he had a wife Leah who gave birth to 2 daughters, and then he married a woman Rachel who also gave birth to 2 daughters. So Leah's 2 daughters are older than Rachel's daughters. Then this fellow says, Kidash is biti agdaila. I accepted kiddushin for my older daughter. Veini idea, but I don't know. Im gedayla shebegdailos. If I was referring to the oldest of the oldest, which means Leah's oldest daughter, Im gedayla shebegtanos, or maybe it was the oldest of the younger ones, meaning Rachel's oldest daughter. Ve'im ketana shebegdailos, or maybe it was the youngest of the older daughters, meaning Leah's younger daughter. Shehi gedayla minha gedayla shebegtanos, because Leah's younger daughter is older than the oldest of Rachel's daughters. So which one of his daughters is Mikudeshes? Kulan Asuras, all of them are Asur Div Rav Meir, that's what Rav Meir says, Chutz min Aktana Shabaktanos, except for the youngest of the youngest, which means Rachel's youngest daughter, because she for sure can't be included in this. Whereas Rav Yesi says the opposite, Kulan Mutares, all these daughters are permitted, Chutz min Agdalos Shabakdalos, except for the oldest of the oldest daughters, which is Leah's oldest daughter. So we see that it's Rav Meir that holds that a person will be machnes himself into a safek, as Rav Meir Paskins over here, that all of his daughters are Asur, besides for the youngest one, and it's Rav Yesi that holds that a person won't be machnes himself into a safek, and the only daughter which is Asur is the one that is the oldest of her sisters and the oldest of all of the girls. So it's clearly not like our Mishnah implies. So Amar Chanina bar Avdimi, Amar Rav, Muchlefes Hashita, we have to switch around the Shita in our Mishnah. And by the time we have a right for this from a Brisa, Zaklal, this is the rule with Nedarim, Kol Shezmane Kavua, anything that has a set time, Va'amar, and the fellow says, Ad Lifnei, so he uses his lashon of Ad Lifnei, Rav Meir Omer Ad Sheyetze, it's Rav Meir that says that he's Asur in this thing until after this thing leaves. Rabbi Yesi Omer, Rabbi Yesi says, Ad Sheyagia, it's until it comes. So we really just have to switch around the Shitas of Rav Meir and Rav Yesi in our Mishnah. And now we have another Mishnah which is really continuation. Let's say the fellow Asur himself from wine, or he Asur himself from anything, Ad HaKatzir until the grain harvest, Ad HaBatzir until the grape harvest, Ad HaMasek until the olive harvest, Ein Asur Ela Ad Sheyagia, he's only Asur until it comes. And Zaklal, this is the rule, Kol Shezmane Kavua, anything that has a set time, such as a Yontif of Sukkot or Pesach, it has a set amount of time. Va'amar, and the fellow says, Ad Sheyagia, so Asur Ad Sheyagia, he's Asur up until the Yontif. Amar, if the fellow said Ad Sheyehei until it is, so Asur Ad Sheyetze, he's Asur until the Yontif finishes. Now V'chol She'ein Zmane Kavua, anytime we're dealing with something that does not have a set amount of time, such as a harvest, we don't know how long the harvest is going to last for. So Bein Amar Ad Sheyehei, Bein Amar Ad Sheyagia, whether he said Ad Sheyehei or he said Ad Sheyagia, Eine Asur El Ad Sheyagia, he's only Asur up until it comes. And an example of this is, let's say he says Ad HaKayet, until the Kayet. Now Kayetz over here does not mean the summer. In modern Hebrew, Kayetz means summer. Kayetz over here refers to a harvest, and we're going to see in the Gemara, it refers particularly to the fig harvest. So he says, I'm going to be Asur until the fig harvest. Or he says, Ad Sheyehei Kayetz. So he's Asur only, Ad Sheyeschilu Am L'Hachnas B'Kalkalos, only once I start putting fruit in baskets, meaning until the beginning of the harvest, even though he used the lashon of Ad Sheyehei. And once again, that's because the harvest doesn't have a set amount of time. However, let's say he says, Ad Sheyavar HaKayetz, until the Kayetz passes, so Ad Sheyakpilu HaMaktuos, then he's Asur until they fold up the knives, because over here he was very clear that he's going to be Asur until after the harvest passes. Now the Gemara brings a brisa, Tana Kakala Sha'amru, this Kakala, this basket they were talking about, that this fellow's Asur only up until they start putting fruit into the basket, Kakala Shal Ta'enim, it's referring to a basket of figs, V'loi Kakala Shal Anavim, and not a basket of grapes. And this is what we said in our Mishnah, is that he was talking about the fig harvest. Now why is that? That's because the lashon of Kayetz means until the picking, and picking refers to taking something off the tree by hand. Now the fig harvest was done by hand, not with knives, like the grape harvest was done with. So therefore, Kayetz means the fig harvest. Now we're going to have a machlokes about this. Tanya, we have a brisa. Hanodim pears hakayetz. If a person made a neder, he's not going to eat pears hakayetz. Ain't asur ela b'te'enim. He's only asur with figs. Now Rav Shimon Gamliel says anavim b'chal te'enim, meaning he's also asur to eat anavim. Now my time in the Tanakama, what's the Tanakama's reasoning that he's only asur to eat figs? Because the Tanakama holds te'enim miktatzan biyada. Figs are cut by hand. Anavim la miktatzan biyada, but grapes are not cut by hand. Whereas Rav Shimon Gamliel holds anavim nami, grapes as well. Kimuradadon, once the stems dry out, miktatzan biyada, so then he will remove them, he will cut them with his hand. It's only when the stems are moist and fresh, he cuts them with a knife. But once they're dry, so then he'll just break them off with his hand. So when he asers himself from pears hakayetz, he's including grapes as well. We're going to stop here for the day, pick up tomorrow, continuing to explain the Mishnah. For now, everyone should have a wonderful day.